السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Inshallah Azza wa Jal, today I will recite from the beginning of Surah Al-Hijr, Surah number 15, inshallah, the beginning of the Surah. Surah Al-Hijr, Surah number 15, from the beginning of the Surah, verse number 1. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألف لام را. تلك آيات الكتاب وقرآن مبين. ربما يود الذين كفروا لو كانوا مسلمين. ذرهم يأكلوا ويتمتعوا ويلههم الأمل فسوف يعلمون. وما أهلكنا من قرية إلا ولها كتاب معلوم. ما تسبق من أمة أجلها وما يستأخرون. وقالوا يا أيها الذي نزل عليه الذكر إنك لمجنون. لو ما تأتينا بالملائكة إن كنت من الصادقين. ما ننزل الملائكة إلا بالحق وما كانوا إذا منظرين. إنا نحن نزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون. ولقد أرسلنا من قبلك في شيع الأولين. وما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون. كذلك نسلكه في قلوب المجرمين. لا يؤمنون به وقد خلت سنة الأولين. ولو فتحنا عليهم بابا من السماء فظلوا فيه يعرجون لقالوا إنما سكرت أبصارنا بل نحن قوم مسحورون. ولقد جعلنا في السماء وحفظناها من كل شيطان رجيم إلا من استرق السمع فأتبعه شهاب مبين والأرض مددناها وألقينا فيها رواسي وأنبتنا فيها من كل شيء موزون وجعلنا لكم فيها معايش ومن لستم له برازقين وإن من شيء إلا عندنا خزائنه وما ننزله إلا بقدر معلوم وأرسلنا الرياح لواقح فأنزلنا من السماء ماء فأسقيناكموه وما أنتم له بخازنين وإنا لنحن نحيي ونميت ونحن الوارثون ولقد علمنا المستقدمين منكم ولقد علمنا المستأخرين وإن ربك هو يحشرهم إنه حكيم عليم ولقد خلقنا الإنسان من صلصال من حمأ مسنون والجان خلقناه من قبل من نار السموم وإذ قال ربك للملائكة إني خالق بشرا من صلصال من حمأ مسنون فإذا سويته ونفخت فيه من روحي فقعوا له ساجدين فسجد الملائكة كلهم أجمعون إلا إبليس أبى أن يكون مع الساجدين قال يا إبليس ما لك ألا تكون مع الساجدين قال لم أكن لأسجد لبشر خلقته من صلصال من حمأ مسنون قال فاخرج منها فإنك رجيم وإن عليك اللعنة إلى يوم الدين قال رب فأنظرني إلى يوم يبعثون قال فإنك من المنظرين إلى يوم الوقت المعلوم قال رب بما أغويتني لأزينن لهم في الأرض ولأغوينهم أجمعين إلا عبادك منهم المخلصين صدق الله العظيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله الله تعالى بالهدى ودين الحق فبلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده وترك أمته على محجة بيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك وصلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. أما بعد. Brothers and sisters, today I'd like you to imagine something in your mind's eye. I'd like you to imagine that you are one day watching television. And I don't recommend you watch television, but just for today, let's assume you do. Because none of us do, right? So you're watching television, you're flipping through the channels, and you're kind of figuring out what should I watch next. And you pass by a channel and it catches your eye. And you go back to that channel and you see something that's going on that channel. And it's very familiar. Because on this channel, you see that they're showing the skies being ripped open. The sea is on fire. And you see this child that just it's there, and it's looking at what's going on, and its hair turns gray. And you're watching Yom Al-Qiyamah channel, basically. And you're seeing it right then and there. And so you're looking, and you see all of these people running around, scared. And something starts to happen to you. Like, wow, that might be something that I might have to go through. And you see these people running around, frightened. But you see a select group of people, and they're there and they're relaxing. Because on the Day of Judgment, as perhaps you know, that the sun is brought close to the earth. And as the sun is brought close to the earth, people will be sweating according to their sins. And they will be in a pool of sweat. So some people will have their sweat up to their ankles, some up to their knees, some up to their chests, and some, may Allah preserve us, will be drowning in their sweat because of their sins. So on this day of heat, you see there's a select group that's not going through any of that. They're in shade. Why? Because they are under the shade of Allah Azza wa Jall's throne. And the Prophet ﷺ mentions that there are 7 whom Allah Azza wa Jalla will shade on a day where there is no shade. And perhaps you've heard this narration. But I wanted to look at this particular narration from the Prophet ﷺ in a different light today. So the Prophet ﷺ said there's 7 under that shade. He said there are 7. The first is a just ruler. The second is a youth who grew up in the worship of Allah. The next, a man whose heart is attached to the masjid. The next is 2 men who love each other for the sake of Allah, meeting and parting based on that. The next is a man who is called by a woman of prestige and beauty to do the unspeakable, and he says, I fear Allah. The next is a man who gives in charity so much that his left hand doesn't know what his right hand is giving. And finally, a man who remembered Allah in private, so much so that his eyes shed with tears. And this narration is found in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. So, these categories of people who are on that Day of Judgment, who are saved. The first, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned a just ruler. And sometimes when we read these ahadith, we tend to think that's somebody else. That's a king, a ruler, a president, a prime minister. But the scholars mention that each and every single one of us has some sort of responsibility over somebody else. Perhaps you are working in the masjid and you're the imam of the masjid. Okay. Perhaps you run a certain youth group and you're responsible for that. Perhaps you're a father and you have a responsibility for your children. Or you're a mother and you have a responsibility for your children. All of these are positions of leadership. You know the very famous dua that inshallah many of us know. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذريتنا قرة أعين وجعلنا للمتقين إماما. Oh our Lord, grant us spouses and children who would be the coolness of our eyes and make us the leaders of the people of taqwa. You know, the element of this particular dua is that we say coolness of the eyes. When people translate in English, they sometimes say, it's like when you say the apple of my eye. But it's really not the same. Because if you think of this idea of the coolness of the eyes, you see, in the desert, if a person was going through a sandstorm, one of the most difficult things is protecting your eyes. And in the middle of a sandstorm, and that's why people are wrapped up in that situation, because the sand can come into your eyes and it's a burning sensation. But when you leave the sandstorm, you get this immediate relief. You're relieved, and you have this coolness in your eye. It's like this sigh of relief. So when a person makes this dua, they're saying, oh Allah, give me a spouse and children who will be like this type of relief when I see them. But the point is the next part of the dua, the end, make us the imams of the people of taqwa. And people say, okay, this is a leadership position, which is true. That we shouldn't shy away from leadership positions if we think that no one else can do it and they give conditions. But the point is, this last part is connected to the first part. Make us leaders of the muttaqun, the people of taqwa. Meaning what? The people I just mentioned, spouses and my children, that they be people of taqwa and that I be a leader to them. So as a just ruler, each and every single one of us has people that we are responsible for. And therefore, each and every single one of us can be under the shade on a day when there is no shade. That's the first part. Now, if you look in history, you find some of the most magnificent rulers in our history. Let me just give you a quick example. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. You know, they say he was the fifth rightly guided Khalifa. You know, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he had a very short rulership. It was maybe 2 years, maybe a little less than 2 years, something like that. And in those 2 years, the changes that he brought to society, phenomenal. And it was against the grain at that time. When he took over the reins of leadership, he made some very sweeping changes. I mean, for instance, they had a practice at that time that if a person became Muslim, and you know, a non-Muslim in Islamic State, they pay something called a jizya tax. It's like a type of payment, type of tax, right? Like you pay income taxes. So there's a jizya tax. But once the person becomes Muslim, now they're not paying jizya, they're paying zakat, right? But what they did at that time is they didn't do that. Even if the person became Muslim, they would still charge him jizya. And when Umar ibn Abdul Aziz came and took over the reins, he said, this is against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. This is against the pleasure of Allah. So we need to go and correct this. And there was a big outrage. They started saying, if you do this, Umar, if you put this into practice, you will bankrupt the treasury. You will make the Bayt al-Mal bankrupt. But he did it anyway. And economic historians, they tell us that in the reign of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the economy at that time went up by 137%. And of course, perhaps you're familiar, the finance minister at that time, he says that people would come to pay their zakat to the Bayt al-Mal, to pay their sadaqah. They wanted to give money, and they would have to turn them away. There's no one left to give. There are no more poor people that we can give your money to. This was just rulership. But the point I'm trying to make here is that a just ruler, whatever capacity, and each and every single one of us is in that capacity, has ramifications on the people or society that they are ruling over. So Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he had ramifications. His practices, what he did, had an effect on the community. What you do in your household, in your masjid, wherever you are, whatever position you are, has ramifications. And this brings us to the next category. By the way, all 7 of these, there is a connection between them. And we'll see that now. Because imagine now where you have a society where Islam is all around you. And it's practiced, and it's alive. A young person, you know, one of the qualities of young people is that they tend to be swayed by their environment. quickly, a little more than older people perhaps. So if the environment around a young person is one of righteousness and piety, this person then gets accustomed to righteousness and piety. But it starts with the ruler that permeates down. The next category is a youth who grew up in the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And how does that become easy for a young person? When the people in charge, whatever capacity that is, make it easy for that person. And you take a look at the youth of our past, subhanAllah. You know, you may have heard of the Rock of Gibraltar, right? And it's, you know, if you went to school here, they teach you about this Rock of Gibraltar. And they have sort of certain mysteries related to this particular area and the sea around that area. But anyway, the Rock of Gibraltar, it actually comes from a different term. It is not Gibraltar, it's the rock, and actually the term it's coming from is Jabal Tariq, the Mount of Tariq, referring to who? Referring to a young man by the name of Tariq bin Ziyad. You see, there was a certain point in the history of Spain where there was a lot of persecution by the ruling Christian ruler at the time. His name was King Roderick. And the persecution has gotten so bad that some of the minority Christians and the Jewish community sent a messenger across to North Africa, begging the ruler of North Africa to send help. And so the ruler sends this man named Tariq ibn Ziyad. Now Tariq ibn Ziyad, how old was he? 40? 30? 20s maybe, right? 17. 16 or 17. Young. And what does he do? He crosses over with an army of 12,000 and he gives this impassioned khutbah, you can say, telling them that, look, in front of you is the victory of Allah and behind you is nothing but failure, is nothing but defeat. Burn the boats because victory is in front of you. And when they get to the battlefield, what do they see? An ocean of people, 90,000 troops. Now you can imagine, like, I don't know what the main football stadium here is, but I'm sure it's probably a capacity of 60, 70, 80,000, like a football stadium packed full of people. This is what they're seeing, a plane. And when the two armies meet, the victory is for Tariq bin Ziyad. He defeats King Roderick. And from then on, you get this golden age of Spain. But what was it? Based on what? At the hands of a 40, 30, 20? No, 17. Let's ask ourselves, what are our 17-year-olds doing? You know, subhanAllah, I remember one of my pet peeves, with even in my own household, is video games. Like, I can't stand video games. And I know that might sound very strange, but I see some of these guys, man, they're like 40 years old. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? It's like, man, we're playing video games, dude. I'm like, wait, how old are you? It's like 40. I started thinking about, man, if I saw my dad playing video games when I was growing up, I might not have had the same upbringing. I don't know, right? And again, I'm not giving a ruling on video games. Don't get this wrong, right? I'm not saying it's haram or anything like that. After the khutbah, like, oh, how dare. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the priorities. But those type of youth that have that sort of character, that taqwa, that are brought up with this sort of shuja', with this sort of taqwa, this sort of iman, is done on the basis of guidance. Now, so this is the youth, this is the youth, a young person who grows up in the worship of Allah. Now, a person, if he grows up in the worship of Allah, because he's surrounded by this, what's the next thing? Where does that worship typically take place? It's the masjid. And so we go to the next category. A man whose heart is attached to the masjid. The masjid. This place that we should be having as a place of refuge. As a place where people come and gather and families gather and activities are happening, where it is enlivened, where where a person who can, as a young person, grows up in this situation, that their heart becomes attached to the masjid. The next category, if that is the case, and I need to go through it a bit quickly, if I had time, I would go through all of them in detail, but the next category is two men who love each other for Allah's sake, meeting and parting upon that. So now let's start at the top. A just ruler, implementing things that are correct and in the pleasure of Allah. This permeates down to the young people, who now, because of what they're surrounded with, grow up in the worship of Allah. And because of that, as they grow up, they become men of the masjid. And if you're men of the masjid, when you meet people in the masjid, you're meeting on the basis of what? Coming to the masjid? You come to the masjid, inshallah, for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so when you meet your brothers and sisters in this situation, you meet and part for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this has, and then there's many categories that the scholars mention, like the rights of your brother or the rights of your sister. Like for instance, one of those rights is that you give your brother and your sister the benefit of the doubt. And this is something that you see is absent. It's not only absent amongst us as brothers and sisters, even in the community around us. I remember, I used to work at an accounting firm. And, when you're in the workplace setting, one of the issues is that people tend to love to talk about other people. And so someone's late or someone's, not doing their job, whatever it is. And people, my coworkers would come and say, oh, Julie, man, she's like late every single day. Can you believe that? What? She's so bad. You know what I would say? Well, you know what? Maybe she's got issues, man. And maybe she's a single mother. Maybe she's got, she's having trouble getting to work. And I would give an excuse. And they say, hey, Frank, he's like, he's doing this and he's doing that. And I'll say, well, maybe Frank's got this issue. And, maybe this and maybe that. It got so bad, or maybe it got so good, however you want to look at it, that they came to me one day when I said, like, oh, maybe this happened. And they said, Fahad, what is your problem? I was like, what do you mean? It's like every time you say something about someone, you always say, oh, maybe this happened, or maybe that happened. Why do you have to give everyone an excuse? I said, wait, that's a problem? Shouldn't that be your problem? Right? But at least you know that if something happens and people in the office talking about you, one of those people won't be me. And this is something that, aside from the community around us, between non-Muslims, between our own brothers and sisters, this is a right. There is a very famous incident in the life of Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah. Imam Abu Hanifa, he took this principle to its apex when it comes to giving excuses to people, rahimahullah. And so one day, a man, as he was sitting in his gathering, his style of teaching was such that he would have, like a circle, and he would have other scholars around him, which were, I guess, quote unquote students, but they would have a discussion type halaqah. So one day a man comes to this halaqah, and Imam Abu Hanifa is there, and he says, Ya Abu Hanifa, I have a question for you. I want to ask you something. He said, I want to ask you, what do you think about a man who doesn't hope for Jannah? He doesn't want to go to Jannah. He doesn't hope for Jannah. Not only that, he doesn't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But not only that, he eats dead meat. He eats maytah. And he prays without ruku' and without sajda. He prays without bowing and without prostrating. And he gives testimony to that which he doesn't see. And he dislikes the haqq. He dislikes that which is certain. And he loves fitna. And he runs away from the mercy of Allah. What, Abu Hanifa, what do you say about such an individual? So in the style that Imam Abu Hanifa is known for, rahimahullah, he posed a question to his students. What do you think? So some students said, oh, this man, he's fasiq, he's an evildoer. Some students said, he's kafir, he's outside the fold of Islam. Some students, they said, Allah ta'ala, Allah knows best. And finally, it came back to Imam Abu Hanifa. And so Imam Abu Hanifa, he says, in my opinion, this man is a believer, and he's not only a believer, he's not only a mu'min, but he's a righteous believer. Now everyone is in almost a state of shock. And he said, explain yourself, oh Imam. So he says, look, you said that this person, that he doesn't hope for Jannah. I say that this person is so overpowered by the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that his hope isn't for Jannah, it's for meeting Allah azza wa jalla, which is more powerful than him going to Jannah. You said that he doesn't fear Allah, and I say that this person doesn't fear that Allah would be unjust to this person. You said that he prays without ruku' and without sajda. I say the particular prayer that you're referring to is Salat al-Janazah, in which you don't do ruku' and you don't do sajda. You said that he likes to give testimony to that which he has not seen. I say that this man has not seen Allah and he's not seen the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and therefore he gives testimony. What? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. He says that he dislikes the haqq, that which is certain. And I say that he dislikes death, as any human being would dislike death. You said that he loves fitna. And I say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna amwalukum wa awladukum fitna. Indeed, your children, your wealth is a fitna, is a trial, is a tribulation. And he loves his children and he loves his wealth. There's nothing wrong with that. And you said that he runs away from the mercy of Allah. And I say that when it rains, he's running away from the rain, because the rain is the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jalla. Allahu Akbar. So when they heard this, they said, "Oh, Imam Abu Hanifa, you look at things in a way that other people do not." So giving excuses for our brothers and sisters, this is one of the rights, one of the qualities where a person ends up meeting another person, another Muslim, another believer, based on the love of Allah, meeting and parting based on that. Inshallah, we'll cover the next categories in the second part of this khutbah. Bismillah. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulihi al-kareem, amma ba'd. I don't know if anyone can squeeze up just a little bit, because I see a whole bunch of people waiting in the back. So if you can try to squeeze forward, may Allah reward you for that. So the next category, my dear brothers and sisters, as we're talking about the 7 categories, a man who is called by a woman of beauty and position, and the man says, "I fear Allah." Now, I'd like us to think about this on a broader perspective, on a broader means. Remember, we were saying that these categories are all tied together. So the just ruler, because of his or her rulership, that has ramifications on their environment, means that the youth are able to be worshippers of Allah. If the youth is growing up in the worship of Allah, he grows up attached to the masjid. If they are attached to the masjid, they meet people, partying and meeting for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jalla. And if that's the case, if this is the quality that this person is now built inside of themselves, then when they leave the masjid and they have to deal with the external world, they're able to do it. So a person that comes into this situation, because their heart has been prepared, they now can deal with it. And think about this in a broader perspective. Today, when you see people, there are so many things that we have to deal with. With the new, kind of increase lately of like Islamophobia, for instance. I'm coming from Texas, so I get to see some of these things maybe in a lot more direct way than you guys do. But it's scary. There's times when my wife will leave the house and I will say, "You know what, maybe you shouldn't go." That's the environment we live in. But how are we going to deal with that? Some of the young people, I can tell you, they're dealing with things that you wouldn't even imagine. I know that they're dealing with things like scientific rationalism. When you go to school and college, this new, what's called neo-atheism, that's affecting the aqidah of people, especially of young people, where many people are leaving Islam. I had a person that I was once talking to, and he was an older gentleman. He was telling me about his son. And he was talking, he had this like twinkle in his eyes, because he says, "My son, he's hafiz of the Quran. And right now, he's applying to universities, and he has a choice whether he can go to Stanford or Harvard or Yale." And when he's saying this, I was thinking, "Oh man, that's nice. Inshallah, my kids, maybe by mistake, will be like that, right?" Something, right? But then that twinkle in his eyes changed, because he started to cry. And he said that, that's great and all, but my son, he's become an atheist. In school, he was speaking to a few people, and he said that all this Islam stuff that you talk about, is garbage. He's atheist. So people are dealing with these issues, young people and older people. Issues with like homosexuality and things like that, legal ramifications, all these different things are out there. And so being prepared to deal with those things, that's what this next category is really talking about. How do you go out and deal with those things? How do we get the young people to deal with those things? In a way that is balanced, in a way that is rational, in a way that is connected to the creator of the heavens and the earth. So this is the next category. The next category, my dear brothers and sisters, a man who gives charity and hides it such that his left hand doesn't know what his right hand gives in charity. Again, as that character is being built, you know, when we think about charity, there's a certain quality of people that give charity. This internal spiritual quality. And what that is that a person whose main occupation and preoccupation is the akhirah, they understand that their time in this life is ephemeral. It's fleeting. It's going, gone, as they say. So when the opportunity comes for this person to now give sadaqah, they're not thinking in terms of the time period that they're living in specifically, but they're thinking about that which is everlasting. You know, sometimes I do fundraising as well, and I tell people, I said, you know, if you're a businessman, and if someone gave you, like, let's say, you want to sell a car, someone said, I'll give you cash now, and you're another person said, I'll give you cash a year later. Which one is a smart business decision? Cash now, right? Duh. Of course, take the cash now. But this idea is where shaitan works when it comes to charity. Why don't you want the cash later? Because you don't know if you're going to get your money. But when it comes to sadaqah, there's a promise from shaitan and there's a promise from Allah Azza wa Jal. Ash-shaytanu ya'idukum al-faqr. Shaitan promises you poverty and Allah promises you maghfirah and fadl minhu. Promises you forgiveness and promises you bounties. So that system that we have in our minds when we're focused on the dunya doesn't work when it comes to sadaqah. So the person whose heart is attached to the akhirah, because they've been built up like this through this entire community and society and system, when it comes to giving charity, they do it. So much so that their left hand doesn't know what their right hand is giving. And the final culmination of all of this, my dear brothers and sisters, is that when this person, when they're alone, now outside of society, and I'll end with this, outside of society, when they're all alone, they are so overwhelmed with the love of Allah. Their spiritual state is so elevated that they get up in the depths of the night and stand before Allah Azza wa Jal with tears in their eyes, begging Allah Azza wa Jal for mercy. And I'm sure you're very famous I'm sure you're very familiar with the very famous hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah Azza wa Jal comes down in the last third of the night and asks his creation, who of my creation is asking for forgiveness so that I may forgive this person? And who of my creation is asking for some sort of need that I may fulfill this need? Imagine yourself, my dear brother or my dear sister, that you've gotten up in this last third of the night and you say, oh Allah, these are my sins, so forgive me. Nobody knows you're awake. In the depths of the night, who knows? Except Allah and you. These are my sins, oh Allah, forgive me. And these are my needs, so please fulfill my needs. And do you imagine that Allah will not fulfill your needs? Of course He would, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in the end, my dear brothers and sisters, I ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq to act upon anything of goodness that has been said, that in these 7 categories that may Allah Azza wa place us, if not in all 7, then at least in one, that on the day of judgment we can say, oh Allah, this day is my best day ever. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give me first and foremost the tawfiq to act upon what's been said, and I ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to give all of you the tawfiq. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب عباد الله إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد أقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
still what to do, please straighten your lines. Make sure there's no gaps between yourself and the person sitting next to you. Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفر إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Just real quick, as you know, in the khutbah, I was talking about the 7 categories and so on and so forth. I'm here on behalf of the Islamic Society of North America, and we're having something called Education Forum. And this is speaking specifically about what I mentioned in the khutbah in terms of building a proper education in terms of Islamic schools, you as parents, and the youth, and so on and so forth. So I have some information here. You can see me afterwards, and I can tell you about the education forum that's going on right now at the Radisson Hotel in, I'm forgetting what it is. It is what is this? Newport Beach. So let me know, or just come see me afterwards. And so this is today and tomorrow. Jazakumullah khair.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Qalu inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un. Our dear friend, our family member, and our Habibi, we will never have a replacement for him. It has never been before. I doubt that it will be in the future. Imam Hafiz Qari Mahbub Ali, our dear partner, dear companion for many, many years in this masjid. Our past Imam, he passed away Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un in Pakistan. So inshallah, day after tomorrow, Sunday, from Zuhr till Asr, we will have a recitation of Quran for the benefit of his soul. So please come join us. We will miss him very dearly.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. First, I want to say Jazakallah khair to Shaikh Fahad Tasleem for the beautiful khutbah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him and khutbah in his time and his information in his personal life as well. Inshallah, next Friday, it'll be myself here, and then next Friday night, we'll be having a family night, inshallah. So we highly encourage everyone to attend. In fact, tomorrow morning, from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., here under the tent, inshallah, we'll have a meet and greet with myself as well as my wife. So that way, my wife and I, we can meet the community, and then the community can also meet with us and get to know us as well, inshallah. On your way out, please don't forget to donate generously. We have the new masjid fund, we have the general fund here as well as the operations. And please pick up some lunch. You can also pick up some groceries outside. All of these that help revenue that go towards the masjid. And inshallah, lastly, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive those that have passed away. In fact, we had another person that had passed away recently. The uncle of Samir al-Mustafa Arafah has passed away. His name is Sami Arafah. We make dua for him. Please don't forget these people in your dua. Those that are deceased, those that are sick, as well as the general ummah in general.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. اللهم ربنا لك الحمد حمدا كثيرا وفي نعمتك كافئ مزيدا. اللهم ربنا لك الحمد ملء السماوات وملء الارض وملء ما بينهما وملء ما شئت من شيء بعد. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد في الاولين والاخرين وصل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد في الملأ الاعلى الى يوم الدين. اللهم انصر الاسلام واعز المسلمين واعلي بفضلك رايه الحق والدين. اللهم انصر من نصر دينك واجعلنا منهم، واخذل من خاذل دينك ولا تجعلنا منهم. اللهم يا ربنا اشف مرضانا وارحم موتانا. اللهم يا ربنا اشف مرضانا. اللهم رب الناس اذهب البأس عنهم اشفهم وانت الشافي لا شفاء الا شفاؤك، شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم واشفهم شفاء لا يغادر سقما. اللهم ارحم موتانا وموتى المسلمين. اللهم يسر لهم طريقا الى الجنه. اللهم باعد بينهم وبين خطاياهم كما باعدت بين المشرق والمغرب. اللهم نقهم من خطاياهم كما ينقى الثوب الابيض من الدنس. اللهم اوصلهم من خطاياهم بالثلج والماء والبرد. اللهم ان كانوا محسنين فزد في احسانهم، وان كانوا مسيئين فتجاوز عن سيئاتهم. اللهم يا رب العرش العظيم يسر لنا امرنا واجبر كسرنا وارحم ضعفنا. اللهم يا رب العرش العظيم اعطنا ولا تحرمنا، وزدنا ولا تنقصنا، وارفعنا ولا تضعنا. اللهم يا اكرم الاكرمين اجعل لنا من كل عسر يسرا ومن كل هم فرجا ومن كل ضيق مخرجا. اللهم ارزقنا من حيث لا نحتسب. اللهم يا اكرم الاكرمين يا الله ارزقنا الاخلاص في اقوالنا واعمالنا، وباعد بيننا وبين النفاق كما باعدت بين المشرق والمغرب يا اكرم الاكرمين. ربنا هب لنا من ازواجنا وذرياتنا قرة اعين واجعلنا للمتقين اماما. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا ان نسينا واخطانا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا اصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به. واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.
I have an iPhone.
Is that a phone actually? What's the right side of
It's good. It's right. You can leave at 3 a.m. or something, right? No. It's usually like this. Well, you're not too far from IH, right? No, because I moved to Richmond. So I live in shoes over. Huh? The shoes are over. Yeah, so am mine. She's up. Yeah, like that. Nice to meet you. What professor are you from? Oh, Richmond and Houston. Oh, Houston. Yeah, my uncle lives in McAllen. Yeah, someone else just came to me. Told me. Yeah. Someone has connection in Houston. This for you, please. Exactly. Your couple of very poor analysis of especially your food about you don't like me because of that. I live in Turkey. I want to give some feedback. Sure. Your khutba was so impressive. Combined 52 khutba this year in my native land.
By the way, I love Turkey. I was there a few months ago in Istanbul.
I wish our imams could do it. It's not as impactful. They give the government written sermon and without
but I know this much. I'll tell you.
Really good.
From my perspective, the people are beautiful.
Yeah.
So keep that
The
beauty.
material is good.
No, meaning the character. People are nice.
Really good stuff. Very
What's your name?
Evan.
Fahad.
Really difficult.
I see what you Saeed. That's your name? How are you from?
I'm from
Morocco. This is for adults. It's an education. Right. So basically for adults to train with these So yeah. So if you're, it's especially good for teachers, but it's also good for us as parents. So it's good for that. So you can put this now. Sure.